Commander Zethkar of the Volani Republic stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing dread. The crimson dots representing Krek's battleships outnumbered their combined fleet 3-1. His mandibles clicked nervously as he processed the impossible odds they faced. The Krek's dominion had been expanding aggressively across the outer rim for decades, consuming entire star systems and enslaving their populations. Their biomechanical ships were living nightmares, grown rather than built, capable of self-repair and adaptation that made them nearly unstoppable. Traditional warfare had proven useless against them. "Sir, the human delegation is requesting permission to board," reported his communications officer, her voice trembling slightly. Zethkar's four eyes narrowed. Humans. The newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, barely 2 centuries old as a spacefaring civilization. They had arrived at the Emergency War Council 3 days ago with bold claims and impossible promises. Most of the assembled races had dismissed them as naive newcomers who didn't understand the true horror they faced. "Grant them permission," Zethkar commanded, though every instinct told him this was futile. The humans claimed they could help turn the tide of the war, but what could such a young species possibly offer that the combined might of 12 ancient civilizations could not? The airlock cycled open, and Admiral Sarah Chen stepped onto the bridge, followed by 2 human marines. Zethkar had to admit there was something unsettling about their appearance. Unlike most sapient species who had evolved past their predatory origins, humans still carried the unmistakable marks of apex hunters. Their forward-facing eyes tracked movement with predatory precision, and they moved with a fluid grace that spoke of controlled violence. "Commander Zethkar," Admiral Chen said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Her voice was steady, betraying no fear despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "Thank you for allowing us to join your fleet." "Admiral Chen," Zethkar replied, carefully touching her palm with one of his manipulator appendages. "I must ask again if you truly understand what we face. The Kreks have conquered 47 systems. Their bioships adapt to any weapon we use against them. They have never been defeated in open battle." A slight smile played at the corners of Chen's mouth, and Zethkar felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. "Commander, with respect, you've been fighting them wrong." Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. The tactical display showed the Krek's fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their organic ships pulsing with malevolent bioluminescence. "All stations to battle readiness," Zethkar ordered. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, but he could sense their fear. Everyone knew this would likely be their last stand. The human admiral watched the display with clinical interest, studying the Krek's formations like a chess master examining the board. "Commander, I need you to trust me on this. Pull your fleet back to defensive positions around the planet. Make it look like you're preparing for a last stand." "We are preparing for a last stand," Zethkar replied grimly. "No," Chen said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "We're preparing for a demonstration." Over the next hour, Zethkar watched in growing amazement as the human admiral orchestrated what appeared to be a standard defensive formation. The humans had brought only 12 ships, tiny compared to the massive Volani dreadnoughts and Therian battlecruisers. Their vessels looked almost primitive, built of metal and ceramic rather than the bioorganic composites most advanced species preferred. The Krek's fleet approached slowly, their bioships undulating through space like massive sea creatures. Zethkar had faced them before and knew their tactics. They would probe the defenses first, testing weapons and shields, allowing their ships to adapt. Then, they would surge forward in an overwhelming assault that no conventional force had ever withstood. "Human vessels are moving to intercept," reported his tactical officer, confusion evident in his voice. Zethkar stared at the display in disbelief. The 12 human ships had broken formation and were accelerating directly toward the Krek's fleet. It was suicide. Even if every human ship was equipped with some sort of superweapon, 12 vessels could not possibly stand against 300 Krek's bioships. "Admiral, what are your ships doing?" Zethkar demanded. Chen's smile had transformed into something that made Zethkar's survival instincts scream warnings. "Something we've been very good at for a very long time, Commander. We're going hunting." The first human ship reached the Krek's line, and what happened next defied everything Zethkar thought he knew about space combat. Instead of engaging in long-range missile exchanges or beam weapon duels, the human vessel dove directly into the heart of the Krek's formation, its hull blazing with point defense fire as it weaved between the massive bioships. "Impossible," breathed his weapons officer. they're fighting at knife fighting range. No one survives close combat with the Kreks. But the humans weren't just surviving. They were thriving. The small human ships darted between the lumbering bioships like predators hunting whales, their weapons targeting specific areas with surgical precision. Sethkar watched in fascination as one human destroyer attached itself directly to a Kreks battleship's hull and began cutting through its bioarmor with some sort of plasma torch. "Sir, I'm reading massive internal explosions in that Kreks vessel," reported the sensor operator, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're not just attacking the hull," Admiral Chen explained, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "They're boarding them." The words hit Sethkar like a physical blow. Boarding actions against the Kreks were considered impossible. Their bioships were filled with toxic atmospheres, internal defenses that adapted to any threat, and crew members that were more monster than sentient being. No species had ever successfully boarded a Kreks vessel and lived to tell about it. Yet somehow, the humans were not only boarding Kreks ships, they were winning. The massive bioship that had been boarded suddenly went dark, its bioluminescent patterns fading to black. Within minutes, it was drifting dead in space. "How?" Sethkar whispered. "The Kreks ships adapt to external threats," Chen replied. "Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, radiation, chemical attacks. But they're not adapted to internal threats. They've never had to deal with an enemy that would deliberately enter their ships to fight hand-to-hand in a toxic environment." Another Kreks ship died, then another. The human vessels moved through the enemy formation like a plague, leaving destruction in their wake. Some human ships took damage, their hulls scarred by bioplasma and organic projectiles, but they kept fighting with a tenacity that bordered on madness. "Admiral, your crews," Sethkar said, unable to hide his horror. "They're fighting in environments that would kill most species in seconds. The toxins, the bioweapons, the adapted immune systems of the Kreks crews. My people have been fighting in hostile environments for millions of years, Commander," Chen replied. "We evolved on a death world. Toxic atmospheres, radiation, extreme temperatures, hostile biology. We didn't just adapt to survive in these conditions, we learned to thrive in them." A third human ship attached itself to a Kreks bioship, and Sethkar could see on the thermal sensors as teams of humans cut their way inside. The bioship's defensive systems activated, flooding sections with acid and releasing swarms of defensive organisms. The humans kept advancing. "What kind of soldiers can fight in those conditions?" Sethkar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The same kind that conquered their own homeworld," Chen said quietly. "Earth didn't just produce one dominant species, Commander. It produced thousands of apex predators. Humans didn't become the dominant species by being the biggest or strongest. They became dominant by being the most adaptable, the most persistent, and the most willing to go where their prey thought they were safe." The battle turned into something Sethkar had never seen before. The Kreks, for the first time in their recorded history, began to retreat. Their adaptive bioships, which had seemed unstoppable against conventional weapons, were helpless against an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Human boarding teams moved through Kreks ships like viruses, immune to the toxic environments and resistant to the bioweapons that had defeated every other species. They used weapons that seemed primitive compared to energy beams and plasma cannons, explosive devices, chemical agents, and, in some cases, simple kinetic weapons that fired metal projectiles. But how are they surviving the Kreks crew members themselves? Sethkar's tactical officer asked. "Kreks warriors are 3 meters tall and have natural armor that can stop most small arms fire." Admiral Chen gestured to one of her marines, who wordlessly rolled up his sleeve. Sethkar stared at the human's arm, which was covered in what looked like technological implants and synthetic muscle fibers. "Augmentation?" Sethkar asked. "Enhancement," Chen corrected. "Humans have been modifying themselves for combat effectiveness for centuries. Better reflexes, enhanced strength, improved resistance to toxins and radiation. But, more importantly, we've been training for this kind of warfare since before we reached the stars." The tactical display showed another Kreks ship going dark. The human boarding team had reached the bioship's central nervous system and was systematically destroying it from the inside. The massive vessel convulsed once and then died, its bioluminescent patterns fading forever. "This is impossible," Sethkar muttered, watching his worldview crumble. "You're a young species. You've barely achieved interstellar travel. How can you be this effective against an enemy that has defeated civilizations with millions of years of experience? Because those civilizations never had to fight for their survival the way humans did, Chen replied. Most species achieve sapience on relatively peaceful worlds. They develop technology, establish civilizations, and, eventually reach for the stars. Earth was different. Humans evolved in a constant state of warfare not just against other humans, but against the planet itself. She gestured to the display, where human ships continued their deadly dance through the Krex formation. Every major predator on Earth was designed to kill humans. Every environment was actively hostile to human life. Every disease, every natural disaster, every climate change event was something humans had to overcome through adaptation and technology. But surely your people must have achieved peace once you developed advanced civilization, Zethkar protested. Chen's laugh was bitter. Commander, humans fought 2 global wars in the span of 30 years, using weapons that could have destroyed all complex life on Earth. We've been at war continuously for our entire recorded history. When we finally reached the stars, we didn't stop fighting. We just found new things to fight. Another Krex bioship died, its hull rupturing as internal explosions tore it apart. The human boarding team had somehow turned the ship's own bioweapons against it, using the vessel's adaptive systems to create a cascade failure that destroyed the entire organism. Your soldiers, Zethkar said slowly. They're not just fighting in those ships. They're studying them. Learning how they work. Human Marines are trained in xenobiology, biochemistry, and bioengineering as standard equipment, Chen confirmed. We've learned that the best way to defeat an enemy is to understand them completely. Every Krex ship we board teaches us more about how to kill the next one. The Krex fleet was in full retreat now, their remaining ships fleeing toward the edge of the system. In less than 4 hours, humans had accomplished what 12 allied species had failed to do in 50 years of warfare. They had broken the Krex. Admiral, Zethkar said carefully, your people offered to help us end this war. What exactly did you have in mind? Chen turned to face him, and Zethkar saw something in her eyes that made him understand why the galaxy might learn to dread humanity. It wasn't cruelty or malice. It was the cold, calculating gaze of a predator that had found new prey. Commander, we're going to do what humans have always done when faced with an enemy that threatens everything we care about, she said quietly. We're going to hunt them to extinction. The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of shipboard systems. In the distance, the last of the Krex bioships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the news that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity had entered the war, and nothing would ever be the same. As Zethkar watched the human ships regroup and tend to their wounded, he began to understand why some species spoke of humans in whispers. They had just witnessed something unprecedented, a species that didn't just defeat the Krex, but did so with a casual efficiency that suggested this was merely Tuesday for them. Admiral, he said finally, I believe I'm beginning to understand why some of the older species advised against contact with your people. Chen nodded slowly. We're what happens when a species evolves in hell, Commander. The question now is whether the galaxy wants us as allies or enemies. Looking at the debris field that had once been a quarter of the Krex fleet, Zethkar thought the answer to that question was very clear indeed. 3 weeks after the battle at Kepler Station, Commander Zethkar found himself aboard a human ship for the first time. The UES Retribution was nothing like the bioorganic vessels he was accustomed to or even the crystalline structures favored by most advanced species. Everything about it screamed function over form, from the angular corridors to the utilitarian lighting that cast harsh shadows in every direction. Admiral Chen had invited him to observe what she called a deep strike mission against a Krex stronghold system. The target was Zirian Prime, a fortress world that the Krex had been using as a staging area for their campaigns against the inner systems. 12 previous attempts by various alliance fleets had failed to even breach the outer defensive perimeter. Tell me, Commander, Chen said as they walked through the ship's corridors, what do you know about human military history? Zethkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Very little, I'm afraid. Most species prefer not to dwell on their violent past once they achieve interstellar capability. That's where you differ from us, Chen replied. Humans study war the way other species study science or art. We preserve every battle, every tactic, every hard-won lesson. Because we know that peace is just the time between conflicts. They entered what appeared to be a briefing room, where dozens of human officers were gathered around a three-dimensional holographic display. The detail was staggering, not just the layout of the Zirian system, but thermal readings, electromagnetic signatures, even biological patterns from the Krex bioships. How did you gather this intelligence? Zethkar asked, staring at data that would have taken conventional reconnaissance months to collect. We've been watching them for 3 days, replied Colonel Marcus Webb, a scarred human with prosthetic arms that moved with unnatural precision. Human special forces have a saying, time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. Zethkar studied the display more carefully. The Krex had turned Zirian Prime into a fortress unlike anything he had ever seen. Bioships grew from the planet's surface like massive trees, their roots extending deep into the planet's crust. Orbital defense platforms hung in space like hungry spiders, connected by streams of bioplasma that created an impenetrable web around the planet. This is suicide, Zethkar said quietly. The defensive network is completely integrated. Even if you could breach the outer perimeter, the moment you attack one element, every other component will adapt to your weapons. Exactly, Chen said, her smile returning. That's what makes it beautiful. Before Zethkar could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The mission was beginning. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zirian system was unlike anything Zethkar had expected. Instead of the massive battleships and dreadnoughts favored by most species, the humans brought what appeared to be a collection of specialized vessels. Some were barely larger than fighters, while others seemed to be nothing more than engines attached to cargo pods. Admiral, the Krex defensive network is activating, reported the tactical officer. They're launching biointerceptors and charging their plasma web. Perfect, Chen replied. Webb, initiate Ghost Protocol. What happened next defied everything Zethkar thought he knew about space warfare. Half of the human ships simply vanished from his sensors. Not cloaked, actually gone, as if they had never existed. Stealth technology, he asked. Better, Webb replied. Dimensional displacement. The ships are still here, just slightly out of phase with normal spacetime. It's based on technology we reverse-engineered from a crashed alien vessel about 50 years ago. The visible human ships began their approach toward the Krex defensive perimeter, and Zethkar watched in fascination as the bioships responded exactly as expected. The organic vessels began adapting to the human weapon signatures, their hulls shifting and changing to provide optimal protection against the detected threats. Sir, the Krex are adapting to our kinetic weapons, reported the weapons officer. They're developing reactive armor plating. Noted, Chen replied calmly. Webb, are your people in position? Affirmative. Ghost teams are inside the defensive perimeter and approaching target coordinates. It was then that Zethkar realized what the humans were doing. While the Krex were focused on adapting to the visible human fleet, the phase-shifted ships had slipped through their defenses completely undetected. It was a level of tactical deception that no other species had ever achieved. Human commanders, he said slowly, you're not just attacking this system. You're studying it. Every defensive network has weaknesses, Chen explained. The Krex bioships are incredibly adaptive, but they're also completely integrated. They share information instantaneously, which means they also share vulnerabilities. On the tactical display, Zethkar watched as the Ghost teams reached their objectives. Instead of attacking the bioships directly, they were targeting something else entirely, the neural networks that connected the defensive platforms to each other. They're going after the command structure, he breathed. More than that, Webb said grimly. We're going to turn their own adaptability against them. The first Ghost team reached their target, one of the massive bioships rooted to the planet's surface. Instead of attacking from the outside, the human commandos had somehow infiltrated the vessel's internal structure. Zethkar watched in amazement as they moved through the ship's organic corridors, their environmental suits protecting them from the toxic atmosphere. How are they surviving inside a living Krex ship, he asked. Humans have been living inside other organisms for medical purposes for centuries, Chen replied. Cancer treatment, genetic therapy, neural surgery. We've developed techniques for operating inside hostile biological environments that other species never needed. The commando team reached what appeared to be the ship's central nervous system, a pulsing mass of bioneural tissue that coordinated the vessel's functions. Instead of destroying it, they began injecting it with something. What are they doing? Introducing a virus, Webb explained. Not biological, informational. It's designed to look like standard adaptation data, but it contains instructions that will cause the ship's systems to malfunction in very specific ways. The effect was immediate and devastating. The infected bioship began transmitting the corrupted data to every other vessel in the network, and, because the Kreks had designed their system to share adaptations instantly, the virus spread through their entire defensive grid within minutes. Impossible, Zethkar whispered as he watched Kreks bioships begin attacking each other, their adaptation protocols convinced that their sister ships were enemy vessels using advanced camouflage technology. The beautiful thing about a perfectly integrated system, Chen said, watching the Kreks fleet tear itself apart, is that one small corruption can bring down the entire network. But the humans weren't finished. As the Kreks defensive grid collapsed into chaos, the visible human fleet suddenly changed tactics. Instead of the conventional weapons they had been using, they deployed something Zethkar had never seen before. "Are those biological weapons?" he asked, staring at the strange projectiles being fired from human ships. "In a sense," Webb replied. "We call them evolution bombs. They contain rapidly adapting organisms designed to out-evolve anything they encounter. The Kreks bioships will try to adapt to them, but these organisms adapt faster." Zethkar watched in horrified fascination as the human bioweapon struck Kreks vessels and began to spread across their hulls like cancer. The bioships tried desperately to adapt, their organic armor shifting and changing, but the human organisms adapted faster, always staying one step ahead of the Kreks' defensive responses. "Where did you develop such weapons?" he asked. "Earth," Chen replied simply. "My people have been fighting biological warfare for millions of years. Every disease, every parasite, every hostile organism on our planet taught us how evolution really works. We learned to fight fire with fire." Within an hour, the entire Kreks defensive network had been reduced to floating organic debris. The fortress that had withstood 12 previous assault attempts had fallen to a human fleet barely a tenth its size. "Admiral," Zethkar said carefully, "I must ask, what are your intentions regarding the Kreks survivors?" Chen's expression grew cold. "Commander, let me explain something about human warfare. When we identify an enemy that threatens our existence or the existence of our allies, we don't just defeat them. We make sure they can never threaten anyone again." The human fleet began moving toward Zirian Prime itself, and Zethkar realized with growing horror that they weren't planning to occupy the planet. They were planning to sterilize it. "The civilian population," he protested. "Surely there are non-combatants on that world." "According to our intelligence, Zirian Prime was evacuated of all non-military personnel 6 months ago," Webb replied. "The Kreks converted the entire population into warrior caste organisms. There are no civilians down there anymore." As if to confirm his words, massive bioforms began rising from the planet's surface, creatures the size of skyscrapers with weapons that could crack moon-sized asteroids. The Kreks were throwing everything they had at the human fleet. "Now you see the real enemy," Chen said quietly. "This isn't a war between civilizations, Commander. This is a war between two completely different approaches to existence. The Kreks don't just conquer, they consume. They convert everything they touch into extensions of themselves." The human response was swift and merciless. Ship Zethkar hadn't even known where they emerged from stealth, carrying weapons he couldn't identify. The bioforms rising from the planet's surface were met not with energy beams or kinetic projectiles, but with what appeared to be distortions in spacetime itself. "Gravity weapons," Chen explained, seeing his confusion. "When you can't destroy an enemy with conventional force, you change the fundamental forces that hold them together." Zethkar watched in awe as bioforms that had seemed indestructible were torn apart by artificial gravitational fields. The humans had weaponized physics itself, turning the basic forces of the universe against their enemies. "This level of technology," he said slowly, "it's beyond anything in the galactic database." "How long have your people been preparing for this war?" "Since we first learned the Kreks existed," Chen replied. "Humans have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. We've been preparing for this specific war for 50 years. The battle for Zirian Prime lasted 3 days. When it was over, nothing remained of the Kreks stronghold except radioactive debris and gravitational anomalies that would persist for centuries. The humans had not just defeated the enemy, they had erased them so completely that it was as if they had never existed." As the human fleet regrouped and prepared to leave the system, Zethkar found himself struggling to process what he had witnessed. The tactical brilliance, the technological superiority, the sheer ruthless efficiency, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Admiral, he said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Chen nodded, her expression serious. How many other species has humanity fought and defeated before entering galactic politics? The silence that followed was answer enough. Finally, Chen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Commander, what makes you think the Kreks are the first? As the UES Retribution entered hyperspace, leaving behind the sterilized remains of what had once been an impregnable fortress, Zethkar began to understand why some of the older species in the galaxy spoke of humanity with a mixture of respect and terror. They weren't just another species that had achieved interstellar travel. They were apex predators who had graduated from dominating their own world to dominating others. And now they were loose in a galaxy that had never seen anything like them. 2 months after the destruction of Zirion Prime, Commander Zethkar found himself in a place he never thought he would see, the hidden archives of the Galactic Council. The ancient Therians who maintained the records had granted him access to classified files dating back thousands of years, documents that most council members had never been permitted to read. The request had come from Admiral Chen herself. If you really want to understand what humanity is, she had said, you need to learn about the species that came before us. Now, surrounded by holographic displays showing the rise and fall of countless civilizations, Zethkar was beginning to understand the true scope of what humanity represented. The galaxy was not the stable, peaceful place he had believed it to be. It was a graveyard. Fascinating reading, asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human xenoarchaeologist who had accompanied him. Unlike the military personnel he had met, she seemed almost fragile, her slight frame and gentle manner completely at odds with the warriors he had come to associate with humanity. Disturbing would be a better word, Zethkar replied, manipulating the holographic interface to display another extinct civilization. According to these records, over the past 10,000 years, 47 spacefaring species have simply vanished from the galaxy. No explanation, no trace, just gone. 49, actually, Vasquez corrected softly. The database is missing 2 species that we've found evidence of in our own archaeological surveys. Zethkar turned to stare at her. Your people have been conducting archaeological surveys in galactic space? Humanity is very interested in history, Commander. Especially the history of species that no longer exist to tell their own stories. She gestured to the display, where the image of a beautiful crystal city floated in the darkness. The Zephyrians, for example. Crystalline beings who achieved faster-than-light travel about 8,000 years ago. They built cities that were works of art, ships that sang as they moved through space. Their entire culture was based on harmony and beauty. What happened to them? They met something that didn't appreciate beauty. Vasquez's voice was neutral, but Zethkar could sense the weight behind her words. We found the remains of their homeworld 3 years ago. The entire planet had been cracked open like an egg, its core extracted for some unknown purpose. Every Zephyrian city, every ship, every trace of their existence had been systematically destroyed. She manipulated the display to show another civilization, massive creatures that looked like living starships. The Void Shepherds. They were nomads who never settled on planets, living their entire lives in space. They were peaceful traders who helped establish some of the first interspecies commerce routes. Also extinct? Also extinct. We found a debris field in the outer spiral that contains the molecular signatures of over 10,000 Void Shepherd bioships. Whatever killed them did it all at once, in a single engagement. Zethkar felt a growing chill as the pattern became clear. These weren't natural extinctions or even conventional wars. Something has been hunting intelligent species across the galaxy for millennia. Something that's very good at completely erasing its enemies, Vasquez agreed. But, here's what's interesting, Commander. The pattern changed about 2,000 years ago. She brought up a new display, this one showing a timeline of galactic extinctions. For 8,000 years, spacefaring species disappeared at a rate of roughly 1 every 200 years. But, 2,000 years ago, the extinction stopped almost completely. Only 3 species have vanished since then, and all 3 were known to have made contact with something called the Silence. The Silence? A region of space in the galactic core where no signals are ever received and no ships ever return. The older species don't talk about it, but it's marked on every star chart as an absolute no-travel zone. Zethkar's mandibles clicked nervously. Dr. Vasquez, what does this have to do with humanity? Commander, what if I told you that the reason extinction stopped 2,000 years ago is because something else started hunting in the galaxy? Something that was better at it than whatever had been doing the killing before? The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. You're suggesting that humanity has been in the galaxy far longer than you've claimed. I'm suggesting that Earth is not humanity's first world, Vasquez said quietly. Commander, may I show you something that will change everything you think you know about human history? Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the archive complex. The light shifted to the red of emergency status, and automated voices began announcing a priority alert. All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown vessels detected approaching the system. Configuration and energy signatures do not match any known spacefaring species. Zethkar's blood ran cold. In all of galactic history, the archive world had never been threatened. It was considered neutral territory, protected by treaties older than some civilizations. Nothing and no one violated the sanctuary of the archives. Dr. Vasquez, he said urgently, we need to evacuate immediately. But the human archaeologist was already moving, not toward the evacuation routes, but deeper into the archives. Commander, follow me. There's something you need to see before we leave. Against every instinct, Zethkar followed her through corridors filled with running Therian archivists. They moved deeper into the complex than he had ever been, past security barriers that should have been impossible for a non-council member to breach. How do you have access to these areas? He demanded. Because humanity has been contributing to these archives for far longer than the council realizes, Vasquez replied, leading him into a vault that contained what appeared to be human artifacts. Commander, I need you to see this. The vault was filled with objects that looked disturbingly familiar: weapons, armor, and technology that bore clear human design aesthetics. But, according to the temporal markers, some of the artifacts were thousands of years old. This is impossible, Zethkar whispered, examining a human battle rifle that the database claimed was over 4,000 years old. Not impossible. Hidden. Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed star charts spanning millennia. Humanity didn't evolve on Earth, Commander. Earth is where we went to hide. The display showed human settlements scattered across the galaxy, dating back over 6,000 years. Colonies, outposts, and entire worlds that had been mysteriously abandoned or destroyed throughout galactic history. The extinctions, Zethkar breathed, understanding flooding through him. Humanity wasn't just another species entering the galaxy. You were refugees. We were survivors, Vasquez corrected. Commander, humanity once had an empire that spanned 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. We had technology that makes our current capabilities look primitive. We had allies among dozens of species, trade networks that connected thousands of worlds. What happened? We met something we couldn't fight conventionally. Something that consumed entire species and used their biological and technological distinctiveness to enhance its own capabilities. Something that had been hunting intelligent life across the galaxy for millions of years. The archive complex shook as explosions echoed through the structure. Whatever was attacking was getting closer. The Creks, Zethkar said, pieces falling into place. They're not just another aggressive species. They're connected to whatever destroyed the human empire. The Creks are what's left of our oldest enemy, Vasquez confirmed. They've been diminished, reduced to a shadow of their former power, but they still remember humanity. That's why they've been so aggressive in this sector. They're trying to finish what they started 6,000 years ago. But why reveal this now? Why fight them openly instead of remaining hidden? Vasquez's expression grew grim. Because hiding is no longer an option, Commander. Something has awakened in the galactic core. Something that makes the Creks look like children playing with toys. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered, and Zethkar could hear the sounds of combat echoing through the complex. The vessels attacking this facility, he said slowly, they're not Creks, are they? No. They're advanced scouts for something much worse. The hyperspace journey lasted 18 hours, and, when they finally dropped back into normal space, Zethkar found himself staring at something that redefined his understanding of what was possible. They had emerged in what appeared to be empty space, but his sensors were detecting massive gravitational anomalies and energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Welcome to Haven, Dr. Vasquez said softly. As if responding to her words, space itself began to shimmer and fold, revealing structures that had been hidden behind some sort of dimensional barrier. What Zethkar saw made him question everything he thought he knew about physics and engineering. The human fleet that revealed itself was beyond massive, it was incomprehensible. Ships the size of moons hung in perfect formation alongside structures that could only be described as weaponized space stations. But these weren't the metal and ceramic vessels he had seen before. These ships looked like they had been grown from pure mathematics, their hulls flowing with geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his mind could process. "This is impossible," he breathed. "The energy requirements alone to keep a fleet this size hidden would bankrupt most civilizations," Vasquez agreed. "Unless you've learned to tap directly into the quantum foam itself." "Commander, what you're looking at represents 6,000 years of continuous technological development by a species that knew they were preparing for a war that would determine the survival of all intelligent life in the galaxy." Their pod was drawn into what appeared to be a docking bay on one of the smaller vessels, though smaller was relative when the ship was still larger than any station Zethkar had ever seen. As they disembarked, he noticed that the interior of the ship defied conventional understanding of space and architecture. Corridors seemed to extend infinitely in directions that shouldn't exist, and the lighting came from sources he couldn't identify. "Dimensional engineering," Vasquez explained, noticing his confusion. "When you're limited to a finite amount of physical space but need infinite storage and operational capacity, you learn to work in higher dimensions." They were met by a human who looked nothing like the military personnel or scientists Zethkar had encountered before. Admiral Sarah Chen had been impressive, but this individual radiated a presence that made Zethkar's survival instincts scream warnings. She was tall, even by human standards, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of millennia and modifications that were clearly far beyond standard human augmentation. "Commander Zethkar," the figure said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Zethkar could feel in his bones. "I am Archon Yuki Tanaka, Strategic Commander of the Hidden Fleet. Dr. Vasquez has told me much about your journey toward understanding." "Archon?" Zethkar asked. "A title from the old empire," Tanaka explained. "We maintain certain traditions to remind ourselves of what we lost and what we're fighting to prevent happening again." As they walked through the ship's impossible corridors, Zethkar saw humans unlike any he had encountered before. Some bore modifications that transformed them into living weapons, their bodies enhanced with technology that seemed to blend seamlessly with their biology. Others appeared to be pure energy-given form, their consciousness housed in quantum matrices that allowed them to exist partially outside normal spacetime. "How many of you are there?" he asked in awe. 12,400,700,000, and change, Tanaka replied without hesitation. "Spread across 200 hidden facilities throughout the galaxy, all connected by a quantum communication network that operates outside normal spacetime." The numbers were staggering. The official human population that had been presented to the Galactic Council was barely 200 million. They had been hiding in Empire. "Commander," Tanaka said as they entered what appeared to be an observation deck overlooking the fleet, "Dr. Vasquez has shared with you the truth about humanity's past. Now I need to show you the truth about our enemy." She gestured to a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. What appeared was a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, but not as Zethkar had ever seen it before. This version showed layers of history, the rise and fall of civilizations marked in different colors across millions of years. "The species you know as the Harvesters are not native to this galaxy," Tanaka began. "They arrived approximately 67 million years ago from what we now know to be Andromeda. They are a form of life so alien that we still don't fully understand their nature, even after 6,000 years of study." The display zoomed in to show the arrival of geometric forms that hurt to look at directly. They exist primarily in dimensions beyond our normal perception, which is why they appear as impossible geometric structures when they manifest in our reality. Their purpose is simple: they consume the complexity generated by intelligent life and use it to fuel their own continued existence. Zethkar watched in horrified fascination as the display showed the systematic destruction of civilization after civilization. Each extinction followed the same pattern, a period of rapid technological advancement followed by sudden, complete annihilation. "They're not just killing species," he realized. "They're harvesting something from them." "Consciousness itself," Tanaka confirmed. "Every thought, every innovation, every creative spark generated by intelligent life becomes food for them. They have been farming this galaxy like a garden, allowing civilizations to develop just far enough to become nutritious before harvesting them." "But why maintain the current galactic civilization at all? Why not just harvest everything and start over? Because they learn from previous harvests that a certain level of ongoing civilization generates more total consciousness over time than complete extinction cycles. The current system allows them to feed continuously while maintaining a stable breeding population. The implications were staggering. Every treaty, every council decision, every aspect of galactic civilization had been subtly guided to maximize the production of consciousness while preventing any single species from becoming powerful enough to resist harvest. How did humanity escape? Sethkar asked. We didn't, Tanaka replied grimly. Our original empire was harvested just like all the others. But humans have always been remarkably difficult to kill completely. A few scattered colonies survived, hidden on worlds too remote or hostile for the harvesters to consider worth the effort. And you've been rebuilding ever since. We've been evolving. Commander, the humans you see around you are not the same species that built the original empire. We've modified ourselves at the genetic, neural, and quantum levels to become something the harvesters have never encountered before. As if to demonstrate her point, Tanaka gestured to one of the humans working at a nearby station. The individual's form suddenly shifted, becoming partially translucent as they existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. They reached through what appeared to be solid matter to manipulate controls that existed in parallel space. We've learned to exist partially outside normal reality, Tanaka explained. It makes us much more difficult to harvest. But the war with the Creks was a test. The Creks are biological constructs created by the harvesters to evaluate the combat capabilities of current galactic civilizations. When humanity revealed itself to fight them, we were actually revealing ourselves to our true enemy. Sethkar felt a chill of understanding. You used the entire galaxy as bait. We used ourselves as bait, Tanaka corrected. Every battle, every demonstration of human capability was designed to draw the harvesters out of hiding. We needed them to reveal themselves so we could learn their current capabilities. And now they have. Now they have. The attack on the archives was just the beginning. According to our monitoring stations, harvester fleets are emerging from the galactic core in numbers we haven't seen since the destruction of our original empire. The observation deck suddenly filled with additional holograms showing real-time sensor data from across the galaxy. Sethkar could see the impossible geometric forms of harvester ships appearing in system after system, their very presence causing local spacetime to warp and distort. How long do we have? He asked. The advanced fleets will reach the outer systems within 72 hours, Tanaka replied. The main harvest force will arrive within 2 weeks. That's not enough time to evacuate. We're not evacuating, Tanaka interrupted. Commander, evacuation was the strategy of our ancestors. This time, we fight. She gestured to the massive fleet surrounding them. Every ship you see represents technology that has been specifically designed to combat harvester capabilities. We've had 6,000 years to prepare, and we've used every moment of that time to become the most effective anti-harvester force possible. But surely the other species deserve to know, the other species deserve to survive, Tanaka said firmly. And they will, if we succeed. But, Commander, you need to understand something about this enemy. They don't just harvest individual civilizations. When they detect a sufficiently advanced threat, they harvest entire galactic sectors. If we fail, they won't just kill humanity. They'll kill every intelligent species in the galaxy. The weight of that revelation settled on Sethkar like a physical force. Every species he had ever known, every world he had ever visited, every friend and family member he had ever cared about, all of it hung in the balance of what happened in the next 2 weeks. What do you need from me? He asked quietly. We need you to return to the Galactic Council and convince them to follow very specific evacuation protocols, Tanaka replied. Not to flee the galaxy, but to move to designated safe zones where our dimensional shielding can protect them during the battle. They'll never believe me. The scale of what you're describing is beyond anything the Council has ever contemplated. They'll believe the evidence. Tanaka handed him a data core containing sensor logs, historical records, and real-time intelligence on the approaching harvester fleets. But, more importantly, they'll believe you, because you've seen the truth with your own eyes. As alarms began sounding throughout the fleet, Tanaka's expression grew grim. It seems the enemy has decided not to wait. Long-range sensors are detecting harvester scouts entering the outer rim systems. Through the observation deck's transparent walls, Sethkar could see the human fleet beginning to move. Ships that had been hidden in parallel dimensions began phasing into normal space, their reality warping drives creating ripples in spacetime itself. "The war is beginning," Tanaka said softly. "Commander, are you ready to see what happens when an apex predator species spends 6 millennia preparing for revenge?" As the impossible human fleet began its deployment, spreading across multiple dimensions to engage an enemy that existed beyond normal reality, Sethkar realized that everything he had witnessed before had been mere preparation. The real war was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 days after the Harvester fleets began their emergence from the galactic core, Sethkar stood in the emergency session of the Galactic Council, watching 12 species worth of leaders struggle to comprehend information that redefined their understanding of existence itself. "This is preposterous," declared Chancellor Vexnor of the Therian Collective, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "You're asking us to believe that our entire civilization has been manipulated by entities that exist outside normal spacetime, and that a species we've known for less than a year represents our only hope of survival?" "I'm asking you to look at the evidence," Sethkar replied, activating the holographic displays that showed real-time sensor data from across the galaxy. Harvester fleets have now been detected in 47 systems. Every world they've visited has gone completely silent. No distress signals, no survivors, no debris. The planets are still there, but they're empty of all complex life. The assembled delegates stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The geometric impossibilities that were harvester ships moved through space like living equations, their very presence causing local reality to warp and distort around them. "Even if we accept your claims about these harvesters," said Ambassador Kretek of the Hegemony States, "what makes you think the humans can succeed where every other civilization has failed? They're a young species with limited resources." Sethkar almost laughed at that assessment. "Ambassador, I need to show you something that will change your perspective on human capabilities." He activated a secured channel that connected directly to the human hidden fleet. The communication was instantaneous despite the vast distances involved, carried by quantum entanglement networks that operated outside normal spacetime. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of Archon Tanaka, her modified form radiating an otherworldly presence that made several council members step back in instinctive fear. "Honored council members," Tanaka said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely audible. "I regret that we must meet under these circumstances, but the time for deception has passed." "You're not fully human anymore," whispered Counselor Ithana of the Seraphim Republic, her empathic abilities clearly detecting something that disturbed her. "Humanity has evolved beyond our original biological limitations," Tanaka confirmed. "The species that first achieved interstellar flight 6,000 years ago was impressive but ultimately vulnerable to harvest. We chose to become something the harvesters have never encountered before." "Show them," Sethkar said quietly. The display expanded to show the true scope of the human hidden fleet. Hundreds of thousands of ships spread across multiple dimensions, their reality warping technology creating gravitational anomalies that registered on sensors throughout the galaxy. Each vessel was a work of impossible engineering, existing partially outside normal spacetime and armed with weapons that treated the fundamental forces of physics as ammunition. "Impossible," breathed Chancellor Vexnor. "The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of our combined civilizations." "We learned to tap directly into the quantum foam," Tanaka explained. "When you're preparing to fight entities that exist in higher dimensions, you need to master physics at levels that conventional science considers theoretical." The council chamber erupted in chaos as delegates realized the implications. Humanity hadn't just hidden their true capabilities, they had undergone technological development that surpassed every other species in the galaxy by several orders of magnitude. "You've been manipulating us," accused Ambassador Kretek. "Everything you've shown us, your supposed struggle against the Kreks, your need for alliance, it was all deception." "It was all preparation," Tanaka corrected. "Every battle we fought taught us about current galactic military doctrine. Every alliance we formed gave us insight into how the various species would respond to crisis. We needed to understand not just our enemy, but our potential allies." "And now," asked Sethkar. "Now the real war begins." Tanaka gestured, and the display shifted to show massive formations of harvester ships converging on the galactic core worlds. "The enemy has committed their primary fleet. Over 2 million vessels that exist primarily in dimensions we can barely perceive." 2 million, whispered Counselor Ithana. "How can anyone fight such numbers?" "By not fighting them conventionally," Tanaka replied. Council members, what you're about to witness is the culmination of 6,000 years of preparation by a species that learned the hard way that sometimes survival requires becoming something more than what you were. The display changed to show human fleets moving through space in ways that defied understanding. Ships phased in and out of reality, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions while their weapons targeted enemies across parallel universes. Sethkar watched in awe as human vessels engaged harvester ships in combat that took place across 11 dimensions simultaneously. The humans had learned to fight in the same impossible geometries that their enemies inhabited, turning the harvesters' own tactical advantages against them. How is this possible? Asked Chancellor Vexnor, his crystalline form flickering with patterns that suggested deep processing strain. Humans are remarkably adaptable, Tanaka replied. We've always been exceptionally good at learning from our enemies and turning their own strengths into weaknesses. The harvesters exist in higher dimensions, so we learned to exist there too. They feed on consciousness, so we modified our consciousness to be toxic to them. They use reality itself as a weapon, so we learned to rewrite reality. The tactical display showed the first major engagement between human and harvester fleets near the galactic core. What Sethkar witnessed challenged every assumption he had about the nature of warfare itself. Human ships didn't just attack the harvester vessels, they infected them. Weapons that looked like geometric viruses penetrated the impossible hulls and began converting the alien technology from within. Harvester ships that had seemed invulnerable suddenly turned against each other as their own systems were subverted by human countermeasures. You're not just fighting them, Sethkar realized. You're converting them. The harvesters have been consuming consciousness for 67 million years, Tanaka explained. They've incorporated the knowledge and technology of thousands of extinct civilizations. We're not just defeating them, we're liberating everything they've stolen. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with human fleets using tactics that seemed to violate basic principles of causality. Ships fired weapons that struck their targets before the weapons were fired, while others attacked enemies that existed in parallel timelines. Temporal warfare, Tanaka explained, seeing their confusion. When you're fighting entities that exist outside normal time, you need to be able to strike across multiple temporal streams simultaneously. But, even with their impossible technology and 6,000 years of preparation, the humans were vastly outnumbered. For every harvester ship they destroyed or converted, 3 more emerged from the galactic core. They're losing, said Ambassador Kretek, though he didn't sound pleased by the observation. No, Sethkar said quietly, beginning to understand the true scope of the human strategy. They're not trying to win through superior numbers. They're trying to force the enemy to reveal something. As if responding to his words, the tactical display suddenly showed massive energy signatures emerging from the very center of the galaxy. Something vast beyond comprehension began to materialize, a structure so large that it dwarfed entire star systems. The core entity, Tanaka said grimly. The original harvester, the one that commands all the others. It's been dormant in the galactic center for millions of years, but our assault has finally forced it to emerge. The entity that appeared defied description. It existed across so many dimensions simultaneously that looking at it directly caused reality to warp around the observers. It was a living mathematical equation, a conscious algorithm that had been consuming galaxies for longer than complex life had existed in the known universe. How do you fight something like that? Asked Counselor Ithana, her empathic abilities clearly overwhelmed by proximity to such an alien consciousness. You don't fight it, Tanaka replied. You become something it can't comprehend. Suddenly, every human ship in the galaxy began broadcasting simultaneously. Not radio signals or energy transmissions, but something far more fundamental, they began broadcasting pure consciousness itself across multiple dimensions. Sethkar felt it first as a whisper in the back of his mind, then, as a growing presence that seemed to fill every corner of existence. The humans weren't just communicating with each other, they were linking their consciousness across space and time, creating a collective awareness that spanned the entire galaxy. 12 billion humans, Tanaka said, her voice now carrying harmonics from every human in existence, sharing thoughts and experiences across 6,000 years of preparation. Commander Sethkar, you wanted to understand why the galaxy fears humanity. This is why. The collective human consciousness that emerged from the network was unlike anything that had ever existed. It combined the individual experiences of 12 billion enhanced humans with the accumulated knowledge of thousands of extinct civilizations that the harvesters had consumed and the humans had liberated. When this vast, distributed mind turned its attention toward the core entity, the results were immediate and devastating. The ancient harvester, which had consumed consciousness for eons, suddenly found itself face to face with a consciousness that was too large, too complex, and too alien for it to process. The core entity's response was immediate and desperate. It began broadcasting surrender signals across every possible frequency and dimension, its vast alien intellect recognizing that it faced something beyond its ability to harvest or comprehend. "It's over," Tanaka announced, though her voice now seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The core entity is requesting terms of surrender." "Terms?" asked Chancellor Vexnor. "Complete withdrawal from the galaxy and the return of all consciousness they've harvested over the past 67 million years, Tanaka replied. "Every extinct civilization, every lost innovation, every stolen thought will be restored to the quantum foam for future generations to rediscover." As the harvester fleets began their retreat toward extragalactic space, Zethkar finally understood what he had witnessed. Humanity hadn't just defeated an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. They had evolved into something so fundamentally different from their origins that they represented an entirely new form of life. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now the galaxy learns what it means to be truly free," Tanaka replied. "No more hidden manipulations, no more artificial limitations on development. Every species will be free to achieve their full potential without fear of harvest." "And humanity?" Tanaka's smile was visible across dimensions. "Humanity continues to do what we've always done, Commander. We adapt, we survive, and we protect the things we care about." As the collective human consciousness began to disperse back to individual minds, Zethkar realized that the galaxy would indeed never be the same. Not because it had been conquered, but because it had been liberated by a species that had refused to accept extinction and had spent 6 millennia becoming something that could ensure it never happened again. In the end, the galaxy didn't fear humanity because they were conquerors or destroyers. They feared humanity because they were protectors who had evolved beyond the limitations that made other species vulnerable to forces beyond their comprehension. And, as Zethkar watched the last of the harvester ships disappear into the intergalactic void, he finally understood why that might be the most terrifying thing of all.